Que es un experto en educación y tecnología. Él es filósofo y es emprendedor. Ha desarrollado iniciativas muy importantes en el tema de libros digitales puntualmente y ha creado entornos educativos basados en nuevas tecnologías. Ha sido pionero en la creación de espacios en emprendimiento y educación y tecnología en Israel y nos va a compartir hoy una charla sobre Israel y su modelo educativo para el emprendimiento y la innovación. Avi, bienvenido, welcome. So Avi, before I let you dive into your presentation, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. The first one is, very recently, TechCrunch published an article titled, "EdTech is the New FinTech." And I would like you to tell us a little bit of what does the traditional education system should avoid or stop doing in order for the mindset of entrepreneurship and innovation to flow around students in their life?
So first, let's say that this works.
Yes.
Actually, it's a great question. And I think part of the reason that educational technology did not succeed in the past is because of bad behavior or wrong behavior of educational system. I would say mainly opening the gates to explore new things, with no being afraid of the fact that we are using startups that maybe are a bit shaking, a bit new. I was in a conference of all the ministers of education of the OECD about a month ago in Jerusalem. And one of the ministers asked me, how can I allow startups entering classroom and putting our kids in risk? And I asked him backwards, what does he think he does when he puts these students in the hands of the teachers? It's the same trust that you give to the teachers you can give to any other adult that really takes responsibility on education.
One second question that I have is, what role do you think education has for innovation and entrepreneurship in a country?
Well, it's a good question as well. I think innovation can be created by a culture that enables this. And I think the Israeli culture is not a very disciplined culture, and it's in many senses it encourages shortcuts. And actually, after one day in Bogota, I can say that I feel a very similar vibe here as well. But I think this is a very strong condition for innovation to succeed. And cultures that we see, a very disciplined culture with hierarchy, it's very difficult to encourage afterwards a kid that grows in this culture to be innovative.
I'm going to let you go down just so you get your microphone fixed before you start your presentation. Y mientras tanto, pues si quiero hacer una reflexión sobre esto que acaba de decir Avi. Una cultura demasiado jerárquica, en donde no se puede romper un parámetro, es una cultura que va a dificultar mucho más la innovación y el emprendimiento. Y ahora, cuando haga la introducción al panel que voy a moderar, les voy a contar un par de anécdotas. Además, que desde la preparación del panel se me revelaron los panelistas, me cambiaron las preguntas hace media hora porque no les parecía que esa era, que les podía hacer una mejor pregunta. Y eso habla de la cultura de Israel. Es una cultura que cuestiona, es una cultura que propone, y es una cultura en donde nada está dicho y todo puede ser mejorado. Entonces, pues con base en eso nos va a compartir Avi su presentación, si ya lo terminaron de arreglar su micrófono, de educación y...
Before we start, I'm curious to know who is the audience. So please, if there's any educator in the crowd, please raise your hand. Okay. Any entrepreneurs? Wow, lots of entrepreneurs. Students? Okay. So I would like to talk a little bit about some takeaways that I have After about 4 years in encouraging innovation in the educational space, this is the backyard of our center in the south of Israel. We are an innovation center which mainly accelerates startups and help them to really take their idea, make it a product, or take their product and bring them to the audience. And when we talk about innovation in education, we should remember that we are not talking about something fancy. Usually, innovation is a very nice word to say, also entrepreneurship. But in education, I think all of us are feeling some sense of urgency. Something is broken with education. Actually, this sense is not unique to our time. You can go backwards in history and read, for instance, old Cato in ancient Rome, talking about the fact that he does not want to send his kids to the schools that was designed by the slaves. He wants to teach his kids himself, because the system, in his language, is not really fulfilling his mission. And we can move forward in history, and almost in every time that someone is writing about education, there is a sense of that education is not fulfilling its mission, and it's very simple to understand why. Education is always a mirror of our society, and as society is changing, education has to change itself as well, and this is not happening in the same pace. In our era, this problem became much more big, because we actually, the pace of innovation is much bigger. All the sense of what we do for living, what are the professions out there, what are the skills that are needed for a kid that is graduating school are changing. And mainly, even the basic skills like writing or reading are redefined. All of us, I think, reading differently than we wrote, what we did before we had the internet around us. And all those gaps are really inviting the need for innovation, the need for a change. And usually we think about technology as the best vehicle for this. And actually, when we talk about technology, as opposed to other domains, technology in education is not a very new thing. It's about 5 decades that we have technology in schools. Okay. And there was not really a big change out of this entering of technology, as opposed to any other industry. If I was a graphic designer that was trained 30 years ago, and I was falling asleep and entering the market again, I won't find any job, because the profession of being a graphic designer in these 30 years have changed so dramatically that I have to learn everything from scratch. If I'm a teacher and I learned 30 years ago, and I fall asleep 30 years ago, I can a bit stretch myself, enter to the classroom and find myself exactly in the same environment. Okay, there are some iPads there, but it still functions very, very similarly. And it's a very interesting question to ask why education did not really use technology to change it the way other industries did. And I try to touch this question through trying to identify some of the things that we see in the world of the startups. And when we're talking about startups, we see a very interesting movement for about 7 years backwards of startups in educational world. It started in the United States, and actually till today it's the main market yet for educational technology. And we see more and more startups, more and more investors, and what is most important, more and more schools that are ready or eager even to implement new technologies. And when we have the need and we have the startups, we have also the accelerators. Everyone is familiar with the notion of accelerator? Who knows the word? Okay, so I'll say a short explanation. Accelerator usually is a small organization that helps startups to really to move from one step to the other one. And as the name hints, it's actually accelerate the process that in natural way would take much more longer. So a thing that would take for a startup to grow, like let's say 3 years, can be done in 6 months. And Accelerator actually gives some kind of curriculum, teaches the startups things, give them a professional assistant, help them to reach the market, help them to improve their product, and help them to get to investors like Elon that spoke beforehand. And the first accelerator, I think, was established about 12 years ago, not connected to education, but in 2011, there was the first accelerator, Imagine K-12, that was established in the West Coast. And about a year later, Mindset was the second one. And today we have around 30 accelerators worldwide. By the way, there is one in here in Bogota, incubated, that we have some partnership with. And all those accelerators actually created some kind of a global movement around edtech startups. This is the map of startups that are dealing with edtech around the world. It's a map that we created during a competition that we are running, a global competition of startups worldwide. And you can see that it's a very diverse map. Our last competition was we had about 450 startups applications, and 70 out of them were from Latin America, and a few even from here. And you can see also here the diversity. You can see the nice place of Colombia in this map. And those startups actually, I think, are a very good opportunity for us really to ask what's the difference. Why should it work now with the startup, the thing that did not work for 5 decades with the traditional educational technologies? And I would like to really touch very quickly five points that I think differ the approach of the traditional educational technology from the innovative approach of startups. And the first point is the customer. This guy used to be the customer of educational technology. This guy is on charge on computing in one of the universities in the States. And he was the guy that was paying for software houses to design for him learning management system. And when he is the customer, he wants to see a learning management system that gives some people to see some of the material, some people not to see. Let's say the teacher sees, the student does not see. He wants tables that can really arrange all the content in a very, very systematic way. And I guess that most of you have a chance to use some of the learning management systems that are used in university, Moodle, Blackboard, and others. And I think what is very clear about those platforms, that they are not really aimed to reach the user that really actually uses them. They're aimed to this guy, not to the teacher, and not to the student. And the reason is very clear. The economy around education is an economy in which the user, the student, is not paying in most cases for the product. The guys who are paying are the government, the schools, the districts, the parents sometimes. And this is why this system were designed for the people who are paying and for their concerns. They are not designed for the teachers and for the student. And we see a very dramatic change when we look on startups in this field, mainly because startups many times don't have any choice, and also because this is the culture of a startup. The startup is usually work in a method of lean startup, even if you don't know the professional name of lean startup, which is a method that really believes in developing the most lean product, going out to the user, checking, going back, developing again. and not creating a perfect product, going out to the market and discovering that the user does not want it. And actually, when we developed the work with our startup, we created a community of 1,000 teachers nationwide that are early adopters. They are testing everything that we are developing. And for them, it's also part of their professional development, and it's a very, very important part of the story. The other aspect is avoiding learning machine. I think educational technology historically was based on learning machines concept, and I would say a word about this concept. This movie shows the learning machine that was developed by P.F. Skinner, one of the most important figures in the history of psychology. It is a movie from 1957, and the machines, you can see them, you cannot see them, you could see them, are actually big machines on the tables, and the student has to write in a sheet of paper, and he gets some kind of a feedback by a different sheet of paper. Everything automated, very boring. But when you hear Skinner describe this machine, it sounds very similar to the way I used to describe some of our solutions in educational technology in the year of, let's say, 2000. He says this is a very engaging, each student has his own pace, it's give them challenges, and so forth. And the idea of learning machine is actually that we have a machine, the student is entering from one side that he does not know anything, and we get him from the other side of the machine when he's much more clever. And the history proves that this concept does not work, mainly because it's a very isolated solution. They have those weird machines on their table, but it's not connected in any sense to any other thing that's happening around them. And I think that we are in a generation which all our students are living in technological culture. All of them are sharing things in Snapchat or in Instagram, and we cannot avoid, we cannot create any solution that is not taking this environment as part of it, and is not taking this culture as part of it. And what we try to see when we say educational technology or edtech, we try to refer all those technologies which are not necessarily the kid in front of the screen of a PC. It should be the maker's world, which brings the physical world and the virtual world together. It should be the virtual reality, which is very, very strong potential for education there. And it could be the other interesting areas that each one of them is educational technology, and we should see those solutions as part of the regular culture of those kids. The next point, which is a very important point, is the Amplifier Policy. Usually, when we talk about educational technology, we try to design something that is taking the school that we all know and try to amplify it. We used to have Blackboard, and now we have interactive board. We used to have textbook, and now we have e-textbook, but we are still keeping the same infrastructure. And I think this is maybe the most problematic notion. This postcard was designed in the end of the 19th century, trying to imagine how it's going to look like in the year of 2000. And this was the image of educational technology. We can see the teacher putting the books into the machine, and the poor kids are getting the same material but through their ears. And it's a very good illustration for the amplifying fallacy. And actually, most of the solutions that we used to see in the market of educational technology are this kind of solution, even if they were created in the year of 2016. Next point, we have two more. Usually when we talk about innovation and innovation in educational technology, we wrongly put too much emphasis on the technology itself. In education, there is a very sad stories that I think are the outcomes of these things. For instance, the story of a mayor bringing all the kids of the town laptop or tablet. I don't know if there are stories like this in Colombia, but I can say that I know a lot of stories like this in the United States, in Korea, in Israel, and none of the stories that I know was a success. All those stories ended sadly, mainly because the school, the teachers, the students did not know what to do with those devices. It was really artificial. It came just like the mean without the pedagogy behind it, without the content. And we see the same kind of fallacy also with some of the startups that we are working with. They're putting a lot of efforts in algorithms and in trying to sophisticate the solution, but not enough on user experience, in user interface, in understanding the pedagogical rationale behind the things. And I think when we think about startups, we should think more about alternatives. Startups is a great way to suggest alternatives to the existing system. For instance, Uber, that we have here on the slide, was watching the world of cabs and saying, let's do it differently. I don't know if it's good alternative or bad alternative, but this is an alternative. And in the same way, we should look for startups who really bring a different way of doing things. Last point, and I think in a way the most important one, for innovation we should be skeptic. We should have doubts on everything we see amongst us. I mentioned beforehand Uber, and I think the founders of Uber had doubts about something that looked obvious for us. And I think if you look at most of the really successful startups around us, many of them had some doubts on the existing structure and suggested alternative. And there is another element which is very interesting for me. Many of those doubts were connected also for some strange feeling, uncomfortable feeling. And I gave this example of Airbnb because I heard about 2 weeks ago a podcast, which I recommend to all of you, in which the founder of Airbnb described the process of creating his startup. And he said that it all started from him meeting a guy in the evening in San Francisco, and asking this guy politely if he has a place to sleep, and the guy answered no. And he found himself obliged to invite him to his own house. And he said that he was terrified this night. He locked the door between his room to the room that he put this guy. He felt really scary from the idea that he has a stranger guy in his home. He knows nothing about him. And afterwards, when he started, it was a very good experience. Obviously, they became good friends. And when he analyzed this experience, he understood that the fact that he entered this stranger into his home brought a lot of good things that he could not imagine beforehand. And this was the basis of his idea. And I think in every interesting startup, there is element like this, of something that we have a sentiment that we would like to reject this solution. But in many of those cases, when we get over this sentiment, we find an interesting solution based on it. And if we try to ask ourselves what are the best or the most successful educational technology nowadays, we have three companies that none of them actually was designed for education. The first one is YouTube, the second one is Wikipedia, and the third one is WhatsApp. They are all used in educational system. They are all used wrongly, because in each one of them is not really accurately good for educational system. It's very difficult for a teacher getting WhatsApp notes from his students every night, and I can testify that my daughter does this terrible thing, and I really feel ashamed when I met her teacher, but she sends questions and she receives answer, even if it's in the middle of the night. And it's very bad that kids are entering to YouTube and seeing things that they not should see when they are doing it for educational purpose. But the fact that these platforms are so successful shows that those sentiments that if we were been asked beforehand, we would reject, actually were a vehicle to do something new in education, and we should follow this sense. And I would like to end by repeating about what I said in the beginning. There is a sense of urgency around innovation in education. It's not something nice to have. We're really in a big crisis around education, and I think that the best way to cope with this crisis is by using the help of startups. Thank you very much.